What I found carved into the wood that day changed everything. I still can't look at my backyard the same way. It's been almost 2 years now, and I still get this sick twist in my stomach every time I step out onto the patio after dark. I know how that sounds. It's my own house, my own yard. But some things change a place permanently, and what happened that September changed mine. Before we begin, please consider subscribing. And don't forget to like the video and share it with your close friends and family. I would also love to hear where you are listening from. Thank you all for the support. It truly means a lot to me. Now let's start. My wife and I bought our house in 2019. It's a split level on a quiet cul-de-sac in Gresham, Oregon, just east of Portland. Nothing special about it. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a detached garage, and a big backyard that backs up to a greenbelt. Basically a strip of woods that separates our neighborhood from the next one over. When we first moved in, the yard was the selling point. We've got 2 kids, 7 and 4 at the time, and the realtor kept saying how great it was for them. Space to run around, trees to climb, privacy. The previous owners had built a treehouse in the big Douglas fir near the back fence. It wasn't anything fancy, just a plywood platform with half walls and a rope ladder. The kids loved it immediately. They'd spend hours up there, playing pirates, making up games. I'd sit on the patio with a beer and watch them from about 40 yards away. It was the suburban dream, I guess. The first thing that felt off happened in late August. My daughter Lily, the 4-year-old, came inside one afternoon and told my wife that the man in the trees had waved at her. My wife asked what she meant. Lily said someone had been standing in the greenbelt, past the back fence, and had waved at her while she was in the treehouse. She wasn't upset about it. She said it like it was just a thing that happened. We figured it was a neighbor walking the trail that runs through the greenbelt. People walk dogs through there. Joggers go by. It's not unusual. I told Lily not to wave at strangers and didn't think much more about it. 2 weeks later, my son Marcus found something in the treehouse, a granola bar, still in the wrapper. Nature Valley, oats and honey. He came inside holding it up like he'd found treasure. I asked where he got it. He said it was just sitting on the floor of the treehouse. I figured one of the neighborhood kids had been playing up there. I'd seen a few of them in our yard before, which never bothered me. I threw the granola bar away and told myself to maybe put a latch on the back gate. I never got around to it. The night it happened was September 14th. I remember the exact date because it was a Thursday and I'd stayed up late watching the Mariners get destroyed by the Astros. My wife was already asleep. I turned off the TV around 11:30 and went to the kitchen for water. Our kitchen window faces the backyard. I looked out, just casually, the way you do, and there was a light in the treehouse, not a flashlight beam sweeping around. A steady, warm glow, like a battery-powered lantern. I stood there for maybe 5 seconds, not really processing it. My first thought was that one of the kids had left a toy up there, one of those light-up things, but it wasn't a kid's toy kind of light. It was too steady, too deliberate. I grabbed the flashlight from the junk drawer and went out the back door. I didn't put shoes on. The grass was cold and wet. I crossed the yard slowly, pointing my flashlight at the treehouse, the light inside. Went out, not faded, not flickered, just off, like someone had seen me coming and switched it off. I stopped about 20 feet from the tree. I called out, "Hello?" Which, looking back, was idiotic. I stood there for probably a full minute, shining my flashlight at the treehouse. Nothing, no sound, no movement. The rope ladder hung limp. I could see the platform through the half walls. It looked empty. I told myself I'd imagined it, that it was a reflection from something. I went back inside, locked the door, and went to bed. But I didn't sleep well. The next morning, I went out to check the treehouse. I climbed the rope ladder for the first time in months. On the platform, in the corner, I found a folded blanket. A dark green fleece blanket that did not belong to us. Next to it was an empty water bottle and a crumpled McDonald's bag. Someone had been living in my children's treehouse. I called the police. They came out, took a report, looked around. They found a gap in the back fence where a board had been pried, loose, big enough for someone to squeeze through from the greenbelt. They told me it was probably a homeless person and that they'd increase patrols in the area. They took the blanket and the trash as evidence, but I never heard anything about it again. I tore the treehouse down that weekend. My kids cried, Marcus especially. He didn't understand why. I couldn't tell him the real reason. I just said the wood was rotting and it wasn't safe. But here's the thing that still keeps me up at night. When I was dismantling the platform, I found something carved into the underside of one of the plywood sheets. You wouldn't see it from on top. You'd only see it if you were lying on your back on the platform, looking up. It said, "I can see their rooms from here." My kids' bedroom windows face the backyard. Both of them. I just never thought about the sightline from the treehouse before. We put up a 6-foot privacy fence the following week. Motion sensor lights, a camera. But I still check the backyard every single night before I go to bed. And I still feel like I'm being watched from the trees. This happened to me when I was 19 and house-sitting for my aunt in Savannah, Georgia. This was the summer of 2017. Between my freshman and sophomore year at Georgia Southern, my Aunt Linda was going on a cruise for 10 days and needed someone to water her plants and feed her cats. She lives in this beautiful old Victorian in the historic district, Habersham Street, near Forsyth Park. The kind of house with a wrought iron gate and a walled garden in the back. The garden was her pride and joy. She'd spent 20 years cultivating it. Jasmine climbing the brick walls. A koi pond she'd put in herself, raised flower beds. A stone path that wound through these massive hydrangea bushes. At night, she had these little solar path lights that gave the whole thing a soft amber glow. It was genuinely beautiful during the day. At night, it was different. The garden walls were high enough that you couldn't see out, and the vegetation was so dense in places that the path lights created more shadows than they cleared. The house backed up to a narrow lane, one of those old carriage alleys that run behind the historic homes. Aunt Linda had told me to always keep the back gate locked because you never know who's walking those lanes at night. I thought she was just being dramatic. Savannah's a tourist town, people wander. The first 3 nights were fine. I'd water the garden in the evening, feed biscuit and marmalade, watch Netflix, go to sleep. The house had these gorgeous tall windows, but the curtains were thick and I kept them drawn. It was just me, the cats, and a whole lot of creaking old wood on the 4th night. I was watering the garden around dusk. I had my earbuds in, listening to a podcast. When I pulled one earbud out to check if one of the cats was meowing, I heard something else. A scraping sound, metal on stone. It was coming from the back gate. I turned off the hose and listened. The scraping stopped. I stood there in the path between the hydrangeas, watering can in one hand, and stared at the gate. It was a heavy wooden thing, painted dark green, set into the brick wall. There was no window or gap in it. I couldn't see the lane beyond. I waited a full 2 minutes, nothing. I figured it was someone dragging a trash can or a bicycle wheel scraping the cobblestones. I finished watering and went inside. The next evening, same thing. Except this time I wasn't wearing earbuds, and the sound was more deliberate. Not scraping, tapping. Someone was tapping on the back gate with something metal. A slow, rhythmic tap. 3 taps, pause. 3 taps, pause. I didn't go near the gate. I went straight inside and locked the back door. I texted my aunt and asked if the neighbors ever knocked on the garden gate. She said no. She said nobody uses that lane except the garbage truck on Wednesdays. It was a Friday. I decided I was being paranoid. College kid alone in an old house in a city she doesn't know well. I was working myself up over nothing Saturday night. I was in the upstairs guest bedroom getting ready for bed. The window in that room overlooks the garden. I happened to glance down and froze. Someone was standing in the garden. They were on the stone path right next to the koi pond, perfectly still. I could see them in the dim glow of the path lights. a figure in dark clothing. Just standing there, not moving, not looking around. Just standing. I backed away from the window, so fast I knocked a lamp off the nightstand. I grabbed my phone and called 911. I whispered the address, said someone was in the walled garden, and they dispatched a car. The whole time I was on the phone, I didn't go back to the window. I couldn't. Police got there in about 8 minutes. They checked the garden. Nobody was there. The back gate was still locked from the inside. They checked the walls and said there were fresh scuff marks on the brick near the southeast corner, like someone had climbed over, but whoever it was had gone by the time the cops arrived. They told me to keep the doors locked, keep the lights on, and to call again if anything happened. Standard stuff. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with every light in the house on and both cats in my lap at around 3 in the morning. Marmalade, who is the laziest, most unbothered cat I've ever met, suddenly jumped off my lap, arched her back, and hissed at the back door. I looked at the door. The curtain was drawn, but in the gap between the curtain and the door frame, just barely visible, I could see a shadow. Someone was standing right on the other side of the back door, not moving, just standing there. I didn't make a sound. I watched the shadow for what felt like 10 minutes, but was probably 2. Then it slid away slowly, like the person was drifting sideways rather than walking. I called my aunt the next morning and told her I was leaving. I packed my stuff, dropped the house key off at her neighbor's, and drove back to Statesboro. When my aunt got home from her cruise, she found something I hadn't noticed on my way. Out on the inside of the garden gate, the side only visible from the garden, someone had used a piece of chalk to draw an eye. A simple childlike drawing of a wide-open eye, right at head height. My aunt had the locks changed and installed a camera. The footage from the first week showed nothing unusual, but the camera stopped working after 9 days. The wire had been cut from inside the garden. I'm a 34-year-old electrician living in Mesa, Arizona. My wife and I bought our first house in 2021, right when the market was insane. And the one thing that made us stretch our budget was the pool. It's an older in-ground pool with a pebble finish and a basic pump system, nothing fancy. But in Arizona, a pool isn't a luxury. It's survival. We use it almost every day from April through October. The house sits on a quarter-acre lot in a subdivision off the Superstition Freeway. The neighborhood is fine, mostly young families, a few retirees. Our backyard has a block wall fence, 6 feet high, standard for the area. Behind us is an empty lot that's been sitting undeveloped since before we moved in. Just dirt, some creosote bushes, and a rusted chain-link fence around it. The OA said it was supposed to be a park. Never happened. This started last October. I got home from work around 5:30 on a Tuesday and went to check the pool skimmer because the pump had been making noise. When I pulled the skimmer basket out, there was a dead bird in it, a pigeon. That's not unusual. Birds land on the water, can't get out. They drown. It happens. But this pigeon hadn't drowned. Its head was missing, clean, like it had been cut. The body was intact, no blood in the water, no mess. Just a headless pigeon in my skimmer basket. I threw it away and told myself a cat got it, and it somehow ended up in the pool. Weird, but explainable. 3 days later, another one. Same thing. Headless pigeon in the skimmer, no blood, no head anywhere in the yard. The third time it happened, my wife saw it too. She was the one who found it. She came inside looking pale and said, "There's another one." This time it wasn't a pigeon. It was a dove, same thing. Body intact, head gone. I set up a cheap trail camera I borrowed from my buddy, pointed it at the pool area. The first 2 nights, nothing. Third night, the camera captured something at 2:47 a.m. A person standing at the edge of my pool. The image quality was garbage. It was a budget camera with infrared, but you could see them clearly enough. They were standing at the shallow end, facing the water. They appeared to be wearing a long-sleeved shirt and jeans. They were holding something in their right hand, down at their side. I couldn't tell what. the next frame. Timestamped 2:48 a.m. They were gone. There were no frames showing them arriving or leaving. Just there, then not there. The camera took photos every 60 seconds, so they were in my yard for less than a minute. I took the photos to the police. They said it was concerning, but without a clear face or any property damage beyond dead birds. There wasn't much they could do. They suggested better cameras and motion-activated lights. I bought both. The new cameras were Wi-Fi connected and recorded video. Not just stills. I mounted 3 of them covering the whole backyard, motion lights on every wall. I felt like I'd turned my house into a small compound. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. No birds, no visitors. I started to relax. Figured whoever it was had been scared off by the new lights. Then I woke up one morning and found something at the bottom of the pool. I could see it from the kitchen window. Something dark, sitting on the floor of the deep end. I went out and looked down through the water. It was a mason jar, sealed, and there was something inside it. I dove in and grabbed it. Inside the jar was a folded piece of paper and a small pile of what looked like feathers and bones. Tiny bones, bird bones. The paper had writing on it, block letters, written in what looked like red marker but smelled metallic. It said, "For the house." I checked the cameras. Every single one of them had lost connection at 1:14 a.m. and come back online at 1:52 a.m. 38 minutes of nothing. The Wi-Fi router logs showed the network was active the whole time. The cameras just stopped recording. All 3, simultaneously. I called the cops again. They came out, took the jar, took a report. This time they seemed to take it more seriously. They dusted the jar for prints and bagged it as evidence. They checked the empty lot behind us and found a spot in the dirt where someone had been sitting. Right up against the block wall, there were cigarette butts, hand-rolled, not commercial, and the dirt was packed down like someone had been there many times. There were scratches on the outside of the block wall, near the top, like someone had been climbing over repeatedly. The scratches were deep, dozens of them, layered on top of each other. My wife wanted to move. I told her we just bought the house we couldn't afford to sell, and whoever it was would probably stop now that the police were involved. She didn't argue with me, but she stopped using the pool. She hasn't been in it since. The police followed up once, about a month later. They said the fingerprints on the jar didn't match anyone in the system. The substance on the paper wasn't blood. It was some kind of plant-based dye. They couldn't identify the bones specifically, but confirmed they were avian. Case went cold. We haven't found anything since then. No more birds, no more jars, but my neighbor told me something last month that I can't stop thinking about. He said the previous owners of our house moved out in a hurry. They'd only lived there for 8 months before them. The house had sat empty for almost a year, and before that, the owner before them, an older man who lived alone, had died. In the house, my neighbor said it was a natural death, heart attack, but he also said the old man had been known to sit by his pool late at night, talking to someone. The neighbors on both sides confirmed it. They'd hear him having full conversations. At 2 or 3 in the morning, when they'd look over the wall, he was always alone. My name's Rachel, and I'm 27. I live alone in a rental house in Lawrence, Kansas. It's a small 2-bedroom place near the university. Nothing remarkable about it. The landlord is this older guy named Dale who lives in Topeka and pretty much only contacts me when rent is due. The house came with a storage shed in the backyard, one of those prefab metal ones, maybe 8 by 10 feet, with a padlock on the door. When I signed the lease, Dale told me the shed was not part of the rental and that I shouldn't go in it. He said he stored some personal equipment in there, lawn care stuff, tools, seasonal things. He said he might stop by occasionally to access it. I thought that was a little weird, but the rent was good and I needed a place fast, so I signed. For the first 4 months, I barely thought about the shed. It sat in the back corner of the yard behind a big hedge. I could see it from my bedroom window, but only if I really looked. I never heard Dale come by to access it. The padlock was always in the same position, or at least I assumed it was. I wasn't checking. Then in February, I noticed something. I'd let my dog Bailey out into the yard, and she wouldn't go near the shed. She's a lab mix, not a skittish dog at all. She'd chase squirrels into traffic if I let her, but she'd get within about 15 feet of the shed and stop, ears back, tail down. She'd just stare at it and then come back to me. I mentioned it to my friend Tessa when she came over. She joked that there was a body in there. We laughed about it, but then she said, "Seriously though, has your landlord ever actually come to get anything from it?" And I realized no, in 4 months, he hadn't come by once. I started paying more attention to the shed. I noticed that the ground around it was more worn than it should be. The grass was thin, and there was a little path of bare dirt from the hedge to the shed door, like someone had been walking that route regularly. But the path didn't connect to anything. It didn't lead to the gate or the driveway. It led to the hedge, which backed up against the neighbor's fence in early March. I woke up at about 1 in the morning to Bailey growling. She was at the bedroom window, hackles up, making this low, continuous growl I'd never heard from her before. I looked out the window. The motion light on the back of the house had come on, which meant something had triggered it. I couldn't see anyone, but the shed door was open. The padlock was hanging loose. I watched for 10 minutes. Nothing moved. The door was just open, maybe a foot, a dark rectangle against the metal siding. Then the motion light timed out and the yard went dark. I didn't go outside. I didn't call anyone. I just went back to bed with Bailey on the floor next to me. In the morning, the shed door was closed, padlock in place. I texted Dale and asked if he'd come by the night before. He said no. I asked if anyone else had a key to the shed. He said, "No, just him." I told him the shed had been open in the middle of the night. He didn't respond for 3 hours. When he did, all he said was, "I'll come check it this weekend." He never came. Over the next few weeks, it happened twice more. Bailey growling at the window, motion light on, shed door open, and then closed again by morning. I started taking photos from my window when it happened, but they were just dark shots with a slightly open shed door. Nothing useful. In April, I'd had enough. I waited until a Saturday afternoon, broad daylight, and I went to the shed with a pair of bolt cutters I'd bought at Home Depot. I cut the padlock and opened the door. It wasn't full of lawn equipment. The shed had been set up as a space. There was an old office chair, a folding table, and a battery-powered lantern. On the table were binoculars, a notebook, and a thermos that was still warm. The notebook was the worst part. Pages and pages of handwritten entries, times, dates, and descriptions of me. Came home at 6:14 p.m., wore the blue jacket. Turned the bedroom light off at 11:23. Let the dog out at 7:02 a.m. Left the back door unlocked for 4 minutes. Had a friend over, female, dark hair. They sat in the living room until 10:40. Pages and pages, going back months. The earliest entry was dated 3 days after I moved in. I called the police when they came. They also found something I'd missed. A small hole drilled in the back wall of the shed, facing my house with a clear line of sight to my bedroom window and the back door. Dale was arrested 2 days later. Turns out he didn't live in Topeka. He lived in Lawrence, about 4 blocks from my house. The shed wasn't for storage. It was for watching me. I broke the lease that week. The last thing I found before I left was a detail the police had mentioned offhandedly. The notebook had entries for times I was asleep, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., descriptions of my bedroom window, whether the light was on, whether the curtain was open. He was coming to that shed in the middle of the night, while I was sleeping 40 feet away. For months, I have a different apartment now. It's on the 3rd floor of a building near Massachusetts Street. Downtown, no yard, no shed, no windows facing anything but a parking lot and the side of another building. Bailey seems happier here too, if that means anything. She sleeps through the night now. She doesn't growl at shadows, but sometimes, when I'm walking to my car after dark, I catch myself looking over my shoulder at every shed, every garage, Every darkened structure with a closed door, and I wonder, who might be inside, sitting quietly, watching, writing things down in a notebook that nobody was ever supposed to find. I'm a 52-year-old middle school teacher in Roanoke, Virginia. I've lived in my house for 14 years, raised 2 boys here, and never had a single problem with the property until last spring. My house is on a half-acre lot in a neighborhood called Grandin Village. It's a nice area, older homes, big trees, the kind of street where people still wave from their porches. My backyard is long and narrow, slopes down toward a creek at the bottom, and is bordered on both sides by wooden privacy fences. Fence on the right side is mine. The fence on the left belongs to my neighbor. The neighbor on the left is a woman named Deb who I'd lived next to for 7 years without a single issue. She's in her 60s, retired, kept a nice garden. We weren't close, but we were friendly, the occasional wave, borrowing sugar, that sort of thing. Normal neighbor stuff. Last March, I decided to replace the fence on my right side because it was leaning badly after a storm. I hired a crew and they came out to do the work. Standard job, should have taken 2 days. On the first day of the work, Deb came outside and stood on her porch watching the crew. She didn't say anything. She just watched when I waved at her. She didn't wave back. She went inside that evening. I found a note in my mailbox, handwritten on yellow legal paper. It said, "The fence must not be changed. What's underneath must stay underneath. Do not dig near the property line." No signature. I assumed it was from Deb because who else would care about my fence? I thought maybe she was worried the construction would affect her property somehow. I knocked on her door to talk about it. She didn't answer. The crew came back the next day and started pulling out the old fence posts. They had to dig up each one. Around midday, one of the workers called me over. He'd found something in the post hole, about 2 feet down, wrapped in a plastic garbage bag. It was a shoebox. Inside the shoebox were photographs, old ones, Polaroids mostly, from what looked like the 1980s or early 1990s based on the clothing and hair. They were all photos of the same woman, young, maybe early 20s, dark hair. She was in a kitchen in some of the photos. In a yard in others, she was not posing. For the photos, she was not looking at the camera in any of them. They were taken without her knowledge. There were maybe 30 photos. And on the back of each one, written in pencil, was a date and a single word. Mine. I didn't know what to do with them. Part of me wanted to throw them away, but something about them felt wrong in a way that went beyond weird. These weren't just old photos. They were surveillance photos. Someone had stalked this woman and then buried the evidence at a property line. I brought them to the police the next day. They took them and said they'd look into it. The officer who handled my report was a younger woman who seemed genuinely unsettled by the photos. She asked me to describe exactly where I'd found them and how they were packaged. She put on gloves to handle them and placed each one in a separate evidence bag. A detective called me a week later and asked if I knew anything about the previous owners of either my house or Deb's house. I didn't. I'd bought my place from a couple who'd only lived there for 3 years themselves. I told him that, and he thanked me and said he'd be in touch. Here's where it gets unsettling. 2 days after the detective called, Deb knocked on my door. First time she'd come to my house in months. She looked agitated. Her hands were shaking slightly, and she kept looking over her shoulder toward her own house, like she expected someone to be watching from there. She asked if I'd found anything when they dug up the fence. I hesitated, and she must have seen it on my face because her expression changed. It went from anxious to something closer to resignation. She said, "You found the pictures." It wasn't a question. She told me she'd bought her house in 2003 from an estate sale. The previous owner, a man named Gerald who'd lived there alone for decades, had died. When she was doing renovations on the house, she'd found similar photos hidden in the walls. Same woman, same handwriting on the back. She'd found other things too. She wouldn't tell me what. And she'd buried the photos near the fence line to put them back in the ground where they belonged. She hadn't gone to the police. She said she didn't want to get involved. She said the house had a history and she'd made peace with it. I asked her who the woman in the photos was. Deb looked at me for a long time, then said, "She used to live in your house." The detective never followed up with me again. I don't know if they identified the woman. I don't know what else Deb found in her walls. I don't know what Gerald did or didn't do, but I finished replacing the fence. And when the crew dug the new post holes, I stood there and watched every single shovelful of dirt come out of the ground. I was terrified of what else might be down there. They didn't find anything else, but I still think about the woman in those Polaroids. She was in a kitchen, my kitchen, sitting at a table by a window that's still there. I've sat at that same table hundreds of times, and she never knew someone was watching her through that window, taking pictures, writing mine on the back of each one, and then hiding them in the ground between two houses like seeds he expected to grow into something. I replaced the fence, fixed the gate, and put the yard back together. Everything looks normal, but I know what's been buried on that property line, and I can't stop wondering what Deb found in her walls that she still won't talk about. Some things are better left in the ground. I just wish I still believed that. This is going to sound ridiculous, and I know that, but I promise you it happened exactly the way I'm telling it. I've told maybe 5 people this story in real life, and 3 of them laughed. The other 2 got quiet in a way that told me they believed me. I don't blame the ones who laughed. If someone told me this, I'd probably laugh too. But I lived it, and I'm telling you, something about it isn't right. I'm 25, I work in IT, and I live in a duplex in Norman, Oklahoma, about 20 minutes south of Oklahoma City. It's me on one side and an older couple, the Ramseys on the other. We share a front yard and each have our own small fenced backyard. Mine's not much, just enough room for a grill, a patio table, and a patch of Augustine grass about the size of a parking space. I moved in last January and spent the first few months mostly getting settled and trying to keep the place cool. This happened last July. Oklahoma in July is brutal. 100-degree days, the air feels like soup, and nobody does anything outside, unless they absolutely have to. I work from home most days, so I'm in the duplex with the AC cranked and the blinds closed. It was a Wednesday night. I'd gone to bed around midnight, which is normal for me. I'm a light sleeper, and the duplex has thin walls, so I usually run a fan for white noise. But at approximately 2:15 a.m., I woke up to a sound I couldn't place at first. It was a low, rhythmic, buzzing mechanical. I lay there for a minute, half asleep, trying to figure out what it was. Then I recognized it was a lawnmower. Someone was mowing a lawn at 2 in the morning. I got up and looked out my bedroom window, which faces the backyard, and there, in the dark, someone was pushing a mower across my little patch of grass. No lights on, just a person, moving back and forth in neat rows, mowing my yard in the middle of the night. I could see them in the ambient light from the street lamp that bleeds over the fence. They were wearing a baseball cap and what looked like a work jacket. Despite the heat, they were mowing methodically, slowly, like this was a completely normal thing to be doing. I stood at the window watching for maybe 30 seconds, totally confused. Then I knocked on the glass, hard. The person stopped mowing. They didn't look up. They didn't look toward my window. They just stopped, stood perfectly still for about 5 seconds, and then turned off the mower. Then they walked to the back gate, opened it, then left. They didn't run. They didn't hurry. They walked out like they were clocking out of a shift. I ran to the back door and looked out. The gate was swinging closed. The yard was freshly mowed. I could smell the cut grass. The mower was gone. They'd taken it with them. I stood there in my kitchen at 2:20 in the morning, looking at my freshly mowed backyard, and I genuinely didn't know what to do. Do you call the police and say someone mowed your lawn? It sounds like the setup to a joke. I told my coworker the next day, and she laughed until she almost choked. I laughed too. It was funny, weird, but funny. Until it happened again. Same time, same night, the next week, Wednesday, around 2 a.m. The buzzing woke me up. I looked out the window, same person, same cap, mowing my already short grass in precise rows. This time I opened the window and yelled, "Hey, what are you doing?" They didn't react, didn't look up, didn't change pace. They finished the last row, turned off the mower, and walked out the back gate, same unhurried pace, same routine. I went downstairs and out the back door this time. They were gone, but in the freshly mowed grass they'd left something, a folded $20 bill, placed right in the center of the yard, held down by a small rock. That changed it from funny to unsettling real fast. I told the Ramseys about it, Mrs. Ramsey got quiet and then said something that made my skin crawl. She said, "That used to happen to the last tenant too." She said the woman who lived in my unit before me had complained about the same thing. Someone mowing her yard in the middle of the night. She'd never seen their face. She'd moved out after 4 months. I asked the Ramseys if they'd ever seen the person or if it happened on their side. Mr. Ramsey just shook his head and said, "It's only ever your side." I installed a deadbolt on the back gate and a camera. The mowing stopped. But for about 3 weeks after that, every Wednesday night at 2 a.m., I'd hear a lawnmower start up. Somewhere in the neighborhood, distant, a few blocks away, maybe. Running for about 15 minutes and then stopping. I'd lie in bed listening to it. Wide awake, staring at the ceiling. There's something about hearing a lawnmower at 2 in the morning that just breaks your brain. It's such a normal daytime sound. Hearing it in the dead of night turns it into something else entirely. I don't hear it anymore. It stopped sometime in August. I've asked around the neighborhood, the guy 2 houses down, the couple across the street, the college students at the end of the block. Nobody else experienced it. Nobody else heard mowing at night. One of the college kids looked at me like I was losing it. I still have the $20 bill. I keep it in my desk drawer, tucked inside an envelope. I don't know why I keep it. Part of me feels like spending it would be accepting something I don't want to accept, like payment for an arrangement I never agreed to. I just don't want to spend it, and every Wednesday night, even now, I wake up around 2, just for a second, just long enough to listen. I grew up in rural Tennessee, outside a town called Crossville on the Cumberland Plateau. My parents still live there in the same house I grew up in, a farmhouse on 12 acres of mostly wooded land. The property's been in our family since the 1940s. When I was a kid, I thought it was the greatest place on earth. Woods to explore, a creek to fish in, no neighbors close enough to hear you yelling. Now that I'm older, I realize how isolated it really was, and how that isolation made what happened possible. Every fall, my dad would do a big property cleanup, trimming branches, clearing brush, hauling deadfall out of the woods. He'd pile it all up in a clearing about 200 yards behind the house and burn it. The burn pile was a family tradition, almost. My brothers and I would help stack the brush, and then we'd all stand around the fire, roasting hot dogs while Dad poked at it with a garden rake. It was one of my favorite things about autumn. The fall I'm talking about is 2009. I was 16. My older brothers had both left for college, so it was just me and my parents. Dad and I spent a Saturday hauling brush, and he planned to light the burn pile the following weekend when conditions were drier. On Wednesday of that week, I came home from school and walked out to the back of the property to check on something for my dad. He wanted to know if the brush pile had shifted after some wind we'd had. I walked out there through the trail in the woods that we always used. The burn pile hadn't shifted, but someone had added to it. Mixed in with the branches and leaves were things that hadn't been there on Saturday. Clothes, a pair of jeans, a flannel shirt, work boots. They were dirty and worn but not trashed. They were placed on top of the pile almost neatly, like someone had folded them and set them there. I thought maybe my dad had thrown out some old clothes. I mentioned it at dinner. He got a look on his face that I didn't understand at the time, but I recognize now as fear. He said he hadn't put anything on the pile. My mom said the same. After dinner, my dad took his shotgun and a flashlight and walked the property line. He was gone for almost an hour. When he came back, he said he hadn't found anything, but he locked every door and window that night, which he never did. We lived in a place where people didn't lock their doors. Thursday went by without anything happening. Friday, I came home from school and went to the burn pile again. My dad had asked me to more clothes. This time it was a jacket, underwear, and socks, laid on top of the pile just like before, and there was something else, a sleeping bag, rolled up and set beside the pile. It was a green military-style sleeping bag, the kind you'd find at a surplus store. I didn't touch anything. I went straight home and told my dad. He called the sheriff. A deputy came out, looked at the stuff, walked the property. He found a spot in the woods about 50 yards from the burn pile where someone had been camping. There was a flattened area in the leaves, a makeshift fire ring made of creek stones, and several empty cans of beans and Vienna sausages, a jug of water, a tarp strung between two trees. Someone had been living on our property, in the woods behind our house. The deputy said it was probably a transient. He said they'd patrol the area. My dad wasn't satisfied. He spent that weekend combing every inch of our 12 acres. He found 2 more campsites. One was close to the creek, about a quarter mile from the house. The other was at the edge of the woods, right where the tree line meets our backyard. That one had a clear line of sight to our house. You could see the kitchen window, the back door, and my bedroom window from that spot. There were food wrappers and cigarette butts, and the grass was matted down like someone had sat there for long periods of time. My dad found one more thing at that campsite that he didn't tell me about until years later. He found a notebook, a composition book with a black and white marbled cover, the kind every kid uses in school. Inside, someone had written what my dad described as a diary. He wouldn't tell me the details. He said it was the ramblings of a sick person, and that he'd turned it over to the sheriff. I asked him years later to tell me what was in it. He said he'd only read a few pages before he stopped, but one entry described watching our family eat dinner through the kitchen window. It described what we were eating, what we were wearing, and what we talked about. Things that were accurate. The person was never found. The campsites were cleaned up. The sheriff patrolled for a few weeks, and eventually it faded into one of those things that happened. My parents never talked about it, but here's the part that still bothers me 16 years later. The clothes that were placed on the burn pile, the jeans, the shirt, the boots, they were arranged in a way I didn't fully register at the time. They weren't just piled there. They were laid out flat, spread out on top of the brush, like a person lying down, arms out, legs straight, the boots at the bottom where feet would be. Whoever was living in our woods wasn't just disposing of old clothes. They were leaving something behind, a version of themselves, and they laid it out on the pile where they knew we'd burn it. My dad lit that burn pile the following Saturday. I watched those clothes curl and blacken and turn to ash, and I've never been able to shake the feeling that somewhere in those woods, someone was watching us watch it burn.